Hi, my name is Francine Filio, and on behalf of the Union of Canadian Transportation Employees, I want to welcome you to this special presentation on cancer and firefighting. We're very pleased to have with us medical oncologist Dr. Kenneth Coons, who will talk about the risks that firefighters face. He also has some suggestions for you and your family on how to prevent and how to minimize those risks. So, hello, Dr. Coons, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Francine.
In simple language, could you tell us what is cancer?
In a word, to describe cancer, it's basically invasiveness. The cells of our body, whether it's liver, lung, bone, brain, are very highly organized because each tissue has a specific function. But cancer occurs when any of these cells undergo a sequence of genetic mutations that cause them to transform into bizarre shaped forms. They gain the capability of producing digestive enzymes and moving through tissue. So these cancer cells digest their way across tissue planes into adjacent organs, along nerve sheaths, and they deliberately penetrate blood and lymphatic channels to cause widespread circulation, metastasis, and death. It's basically very akin to a fire. When it gets going, it burns and just consumes the entire structure. That would be a simple definition of my view of cancer.
That's a very visual analogy. Thank you for that. Is it true that eventually everyone will get cancer?
The question used to be, will I get cancer? But the question is, when will I get cancer? In a short, answer, yes. I mean, if we live long enough, if we don't die of other things, we will eventually die of cancer. I think gerontologists have calculated that the maximum age that a human can attain is 126 years. Eventually we'll acquire genetic mutations, and almost everyone will develop cancer if they survive everything else. Physicians have sort of like a rough rule of thumb when we talk about a condition like prostate cancer. There's an understanding that if you're 70 years old, you'll have a 70% chance of having cancer cells in your prostate gland. If you're 80, there'll be an 80% chance. And a 100-year-old man will have a 100% chance of having cancer cells in his prostate gland. So yes, cancer is a natural consequence of aging. And everyone will eventually develop cancer if they live long enough.
Now, what are the factors that can contribute to getting cancer?
I often think of cancer, I've had decades to think about this question. And I often think about cancer, it's kind of like a game, like cribbage. You're dealt different hands and you can play them in different ways, and you need to get 121 points. Cancer is kind of like that in a way, in that it's a multifactorial process that operates on an individual over years. Let's say, for example, you needed 100 points to get a cancer. Well, 5 points would come from that some cancers are germline mutations that are inherited vertically. You can get a cancer gene for retinoblastoma, a cancer of the eye. So that's 5 points. Another 20 points comes from that 20% of cancers are simply bad luck mutations, like our national hero, Terry Fox, had a bad luck mutation for an osteogenic sarcoma that eventually claimed his life. So that's 25 points. Another 20 points comes from stress. Stress is not only damaging to the telomeres on the chromosomes and damaging to the organs, but it's the things that we do to deal with the stress, like smoking, drinking, other high-risk activities, and so forth. That gives you 45 points in your quest to win this prize. Then another 20 points comes from the diet. The diet is so critically important. In Stone Age cultures, we had to work all day just to get enough calories to survive. Now we can go to the supermarket and we can buy as much as we want at low cost, these high fructose, corn syrup, calorie dense, preserved foods without natural micronutrients and fiber, and we can eat as much as we want. Another thing that occurred to me as an oncologist over the years is that we eat far too much. So diet would give you another 20%. Now you've got 65 points in your quest towards getting a cancer. Another 20 points comes from the most ruinous of all human endeavors, which is inactivity. Every tissue in the body has stem cells, liver, lung, bone, brain. And the stimulus to trigger those stem cells to repair and regenerate tissue is movement. And we've simply, as a culture, we've simply stopped moving. People drive to the liquor store to get their cigarettes and alcohol. And then finally, and this applies directly to firefighters, firefighting is carcinogenic. Your last 15 points comes from the unavoidable exposures to a myriad of carcinogens. So if you think of cancer, it's really a multifactorial process that is operating on an individual over decades. And the good news about that is most of these, except for the genetic inheritance, are modifiable risk factors. For example, you can modify your diet, you can exercise. Firefighters can take measures to reduce. They cannot eliminate, unfortunately, that's not possible, but to reduce their exposures to carcinogens. So that would be basically a general multifactorial algorithm explaining how you can, over decades, earn a cancer.
So tell me, what kinds of cancer do firefighters get?
This is one of the most intriguing questions that I've thought about and spent a lot of time thinking about. You know, the human body has approximately 37 trillion cells divided into arguably 220 different cell types, which are arranged into about 79 organ systems. And each of these cells has, maybe 50,000 protein coding genes. So when a firefighter encounters a fire, even if they're wearing their bunker gear, you get thousands of these carcinogens synthesized in the heat and pressure of a fire. These molecules are extremely small, less than a billionth of a meter in diameter. And in a heated gaseous phase, they pass right through the bunker gear. So a firefighter is saturated with potentially thousands of different carcinogens that are absorbed into the body, either via inhalation, ingestion, or absorption through the skin. And these carcinogens are circulated around in the blood to all of these different organ systems. So based on individual vulnerabilities of a particular firefighter, in my opinion, as an oncologist, a firefighter can get any type of cancer. And they can get that cancer at any time. There are no time limits. You can get a leukemia within 2 or 3 years of a massive benzene exposure, or if you're exposed to, insulation, what's the word I'm looking for? Asbestos, yeah. Or if you're exposed to asbestos, it can take up to 40 years to get a mesothelioma. But a firefighter is liable to get any type of cancer, in my opinion.
What about women who are in the fire industry or in the fire service industry?
Because of shifting gender dynamics, women are a growing force in the fire service. I think in North America, women comprise about 8%. And due to the anatomical and physiological differences, reproductive anatomical and physiological differences, female firefighters are subject to several different types of cancer that are not seen in men. For example, women get 100 times more breast cancer. They get ovarian cancer, fallopian tube cancer, cancer of the uterus, cancer of the cervix. And so they are subject to different types of cancer, many of which are not covered in presumption legislation. This is a particular interest of mine at the present.
What are firefighters more apt to get in terms of cancer?
Firefighters encounter potentially thousands of different carcinogens that are produced in the heat and pressure of a fire. These molecules are extremely small and they penetrate the bunker gear. They readily enter the body through the skin, the upper aerodigestive tract, or the lungs. And these carcinogens are circulated around to all the tissues in the body. So the answer is that a firefighter can get any type of cancer. Firefighters get the same cancers as the general public, only they get them more.
What kind of cancers are we talking about?
The most common cancers would be lung, breast, colon, prostate, bladder, kidney, thyroid, lymphoma, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, pancreatic cancer. There's a number of different cancers. As an aside, a firefighter can get any type of cancer, and they get them more than the general public.
Earlier, you talked a little bit about firefighters at airports. Can you tell us more about the more risk that they face as firefighters at airports?
Yeah, this could be a potentially unique situation because airport firefighters encounter different circumstances. They practice with these perfluorinated alkyl substances which are fire resistant and fire retardant. These molecules were produced to last forever. These molecules are extremely stable. They don't break down. They can be found in water, wind, soil, and they saturate the body of a firefighter, and they can cause all types of chronic illnesses, including cancer. Another important consideration is the jet fuel. If you look at the World Trade Center disaster, when those jets went into the Twin Towers, they dumped thousands of gallons of jet fuel into the elevator shafts, which essentially ignited. And when the buildings collapsed into this fine, sticky talcum powder, you can see photographs of the firefighters coated with this material. Well, cancer jumped by 20 to 30% in those firefighters within a few years. And they were very aggressive cancers in young firefighters. So airport firefighters are subject to foams and jet fuel, which are carcinogenic and deleterious for their health.
So what can firefighters do to reduce the risk of getting cancer?
Essentially, avoiding cancer comes down to personal accountability. Is a firefighter educated and aware that they're at higher risk for getting many different types of cancer? And are they motivated to take steps to ameliorate the risk? Because there are a number of different things that a firefighter can modify. For example, diet, exercise, their activities in the fire ground, decontamination procedures. So yes, there are a number of things that a firefighter can do if they're aware and they're motivated to reduce the risk.
Does it matter who your doctor is when you're a firefighter?
I've always considered that to be a very important question because in many branches of medicine, it's the therapeutic alliance between the patient and their physician that determines the overall survival advantage of a person or the therapeutic outcome. I know that some doctors do not believe that firefighters are at risk of higher rates of cancer. So a firefighter needs to find a doctor who is aware of the risks that firefighter is facing and form a partnership with a cooperative doctor who's willing to enter into a screening and surveillance program with that firefighter.
Is it better to get an early diagnosis, I guess, with the doctor that you choose to have as a firefighter?
I often think of cancer like a fire. The best way to fight a fire is not to have one. And the best way to deal with cancer is simply not to get it. However, if a fire is discovered early, it can be extinguished quickly. If it's not discovered, it'll consume the entire structure. And it's the same with cancer. Any type of cancer that's diagnosed earlier will have a much better therapeutic outcome.
So how can firefighters help each other, support each other around cancer?
One thing that I've learned after being a doctor for decades is that connection is the most fundamental human requirement. Our relationships, all learning, motivation, and action comes to us through our relationships. And firefighters can support each other by holding each other accountable for personal lifestyle factors and also practices in the fire ground that will reduce their exposure to carcinogens. So I think that the relationship between firefighters is critical for supporting and guiding their activity in more healthful ways.
So, do unions and peer support networks help as well? And if so, why?
You know, many firefighters who have survived cancer go on to develop peer support networks. For example, the Firefighter Cancer Support Network in the United States, firefighters helping one another around a diagnosis of cancer is a critical way of supporting a firefighter through the diagnosis. And unions, I have found personally to be very helpful in supporting a firefighter who's encountering a diagnosis of cancer. And I've received personally a lot of encouragement from unions to go continue on with my research and writing. So I think that the union is a very strong, encouraging force in supporting firefighters.
What would you recommend to a brand new firefighter on about cancer?
Firefighters are generally regarded as brave heroes by the general public. And firefighters are not used to reaching out for help because they're the people that rush to the scene of an emergency and they give help. So one thing that I would encourage a new firefighter is to, stay connected to your support systems and reach out for help. We know from scientific research that firefighting is carcinogenic. And if a young firefighter is educated and motivated to take steps to reduce their cancer risks, and they reach out for help when they need it, that will confer an overall survival advantage to a young firefighter. So a firefighter has to be personally accountable for their health.
So we've come to the end of this interview. Do you have any final words you would like to share?
Yes, I do. As a member of the general public, I can say that we regard firefighters as heroes, but they shouldn't have to die because of it. The public often thinks that firefighters die by being crushed or incinerated or asphyxiated, but most firefighters actually go on to die of cancer. And if a firefighter is aware of their risks and partners with their physician and takes personal accountability, those risks can be significantly ameliorated.
Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing this insightful perspective and for sharing your wise words and recommendations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francine. It was a pleasure.